Hello, friends. Welcome to Nexus, a smart buildings technology podcast for smart humans. I'm your host, James Dice. If we haven't met before, I write a weekly newsletter on this same topic. It's also called Nexus. Each week, I share what I've learned, my opinions, and what I'm excited about in the quickly evolving world of intelligent buildings. Readers have called Nexus the best way to stay up to date on the future of this industry without all the marketing fluff. You can check it out and subscribe at nexus.substack.com or click the link in the show notes. Since starting the Nexus newsletter, many of you have reached out to me wanting to talk shop, and we have. After a few weeks of those wonderful conversations, I realized I needed to record and share them with our growing community. So here we are. The Nexus podcast is born. This is our chance to explore and learn with the brightest in our industry together. All right, this episode is part of a new series of shorter, more casual podcast conversations called Friendly Rants. These episodes are quick, 10-ish minute episodes on something that pisses us off. Everyone loves a good rant, right? They're called Friendly Rants for many reasons. First, because our guest is my good friend Dennis Krieger. Second, because we're not here to talk shit on anyone unless they truly deserve it, of course. And third, because we're not here to complain. We promise to propose a solution to our rant every time. This episode of the podcast is directly funded by listeners like you who have joined the Nexus Pro membership community. You can find info on how to join and support the podcast at nexus.substack.com. Without further ado, please enjoy this installment of Friendly Rants. Dennis and I are both on LinkedIn. Let us know what you think. Okay, Dennis, I got a rant for you.
Let's hear it.
This week's rant is the overuse of the word platform or misuse of the word platform. So I don't really have a definition of the word platform. I'm certainly not a platform architect.
Is that the
problem? And that is the problem. But I know what it isn't. And I know how we should be using it. And I feel like I know how we should be using it. I'm not trying to define it for the industry. So what a platform isn't is, I feel like we've been picking on these IoT platforms, but you have these IoT platforms and it's this vertical, sensor to cloud, closed off. You can't even really call it an ecosystem really, because all they're trying to do is get data into their cloud, right? And provide you some sort of visualization. And that would be what I would call a vertical or closed off type of platform.
Should we call that
another way,
an application? Is that,
yeah.
What would you call that, I guess, if it's not a platform?
Well, I'll get to what a platform I think is in a second. But yeah, I would call it I use the word stack a lot, but it's basically hardware and software that provides you visualization in some sort of application, right? And it's often siloed. So you're not saying I'm going to collect all of the sensors. It's just I'm going to collect, these specific lighting sensors. There's a lot of lighting platforms, right, where they're just collecting lighting data, occupancy sensor data, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden now it's a platform, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And we've used this term on Nexus before, home run derby. So this is where the people that are trying to be the solution come in, where they're we're going to come in, we're not going to really talk to anyone else. We're going to provide our platform for you. So that's what I think a platform isn't. What I think a platform is where we talk about the all-star game. So the all-star game is you're going to have a cohesive ecosystem where each position on the baseball field is the best of the best at their position, and they're all working together to form this community where the value is being produced that's greater than the sum of all the parts, basically. And that's where you get into this concept of the iPhone, for instance. The iPhone is a platform in its app store where I can write some code and I can have it installed on your phone in 2 seconds. So I think the way that translates over to buildings is that all of these different, what aren't platforms, is they're all doing, $10, $20, $30,000 worth of integration to get their data into their platform, and then right next door you have the next vendor doing the same thing. Whereas if you had something like an iPhone that is a true platform, you do basically one integration and everybody integrates with the platform.
So you're kind of defining a common, like, that middleware layer? Like, you're saying basically like you shouldn't have multiple applications sitting next to each other, pulling the same data if you can bring it all into a common environment, the platform, and serve that data up to whatever applications require it, right? It's about that separation of, I guess, the physical integrations down to the systems, having a comprehensive strategy around how you get to an OT network or a non-network connected thing that's more on the IoT space, whatever, bring that up into a common layer that is then served up to applications. That's your definition of platform.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to preach for that type of solution really here. I'm trying to say like there's a pretty well-defined word for platform outside of our industry. So like
Mm-hmm.
Facebook is a platform, right? Facebook
Mm-hmm.
brings all of the users of Facebook together onto the platform, and then they serve advertisements to them. So it's basically a marketplace, right? So one side of the marketplace is the advertisers, the other side of the marketplace is all of us that just want to see our pictures of our friends' cats and shit, right? So that's the platform that Facebook is providing. Uber is a platform in that it's connecting the drivers on one side and all of us that just want to get to work on the other side, right? I think in our industry, you have all these efficiencies that are created by these types of platform business models. In our industry, that is sorely needed, I think, that
Mm-hmm.
approach to these platform marketplaces and opening up the data to anyone that can use it in sort of an integrated fashion. I think we're losing that when we have these home run derby sorts of platforms.
Hmm. Well, and I think so. It's interesting. Like, I get what you're saying with like the misuse of the term, because I think another way of saying that is it implies maybe more capability, or even just more of a comprehensive thing than what's actually being delivered. Like, you're a platform, but you only grab these points from VMS, or you're a platform, but you only have, lighting points in there. And so just generically, like, we should reserve the term platform that is, truly the interface between building and say user, and it should be more comprehensive on the other side. Is maybe if I were to say it back to you, what you're kind of describing.
Yeah, I think we need like a minimum set of criteria for using that word.
Yeah. Well, and then I think what's interesting, like, look at ASHRAE 223 and all the interoperability initiatives going on right now, I think are trying to work toward defining the language of the platform, right? Like, it shouldn't be a proprietary thing that a vendor solves for. And I think we're all across that. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, anyone
Yeah.
who would be listening to this podcast. I think the interesting comment challenge, I think, for me on that is like, should any vendor own that platform then? Like, if you're a big enough company, shouldn't the platform be internal to you, or should you buy a platform? Does that make sense? Like, I'm always a
No, that's a
little
great question. I don't.
conflicted on that. Like, I don't know who's going to solve this. Like, if is Microsoft as your IoT platform going to solve for that, for big companies that have the infrastructure to build that out?
Mhm.
Or is it going to be a vendor who probably deploys similar tools, like with Microsoft or AWS or any other of the cloud solutions, going to go build that? And should it
Mhm.
be more of a service or of a SaaS? These are open questions, but I think what you're describing makes a lot of sense. But who owns and manages and configures that platform feels like an interesting question, because if a vendor comes in and does that, yeah, it's going to work well for that vendor. And maybe this is back to the kind of Android, Apple, like, like that kind
Yeah.
of debate. Like,
Mhm.
should it be truly open where anyone can kind of go build their own platform, or is it going to be more of a vendor delivered? I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
I absolutely do not know the answer to that question. I think that I'd like to start getting closer to the answers, though. So one of the threads that I've pulled on in the past with Nick Gajewski is he talks about like, okay, if you have that centralized platform that's serving data everywhere, basically, then that data model has to accommodate all of the use cases that are downstream of it, right? So what Nick and I have talked about is that their data model requires a lot. Like it expects a lot. It needs quite a bit of information. Now they have fallbacks, right? So they don't need all of it to do everything, but they're going to need more information than say say other people's FDD packages that aren't, we're doing friendly rants, so the calling out is done. They're going to need like probably more information than a more simple, more alarm-based FDD package, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, and I think to expand on that idea, I think I'm probably guilty of some of this a little bit. Like I go sell digital twins. Well, what is that, right? It's
mhm,
kind of a platform. Kind of depends on what you build into the digital twin, right? And so, I'm on this edge of talking platform, talking application. But I also think what's interesting for just my experience doing delivery of digital twins is like we do try to bring together more than just like live data, right? Like I think all the interoperability stuff going on is right around let's combine haystack brick, let's define how the data model looks, and that's great. But like the platform is about, to me, aligning things like I have 3 CMMS platforms in my portfolio.
yeah,
They each have categories, priorities, problem statement codes, things that like mean something to platform ABC.
mhm,
Where's the like standard for that, right? It's never going to exist. So
yeah,
who is going to bring into a platform the common comfort complaint across 3 CMMS platforms? How do I make it look the same, have the same priority, and have the same workflow in a platform, right? I
yeah,
think that conversation is actually, to me, incredibly interesting and complicated, unfortunately. I think it's like, to go along with your rant here, if you sell that idea to a customer that actually has ambitions of not just integrating BACnet or even just BMS data, then you're getting into those nuances, and essentially you're just normalizing data fields now across these different like software applications, not so much data points, right?
right,
That to me is like what this interoperability thing gets to eventually, that no standard is going to, that I can think of, would ever solve for. That's one example. There's 3 CMMS platforms, tenant service requests coming in with all different fields. How do we make that conform? To just drop into like the technical weeds for a second, to me the only way to do that is to have each individual CMMS, if you think of that as the application, conform to the platform, meaning
yeah,
the CMMS needs to change or map, I should say. Their category said temperature. We want it to say comfort. It needs to map into the platform's
mhm,
definition of this. This is what our master CMMS model looks like.
yeah,
And so if you kind of force yourself to get out of the BMS data side and into more like what are the working systems that the people use in this building, that platform concept gets even more complicated. And there's even more to align and normalize now between all these parts. And I personally, again, I don't have a solution for this, but the only way I can see that working is if you conform to the platform standard. And then I'm back to that first question I had: who's writing that standard? Is it something you buy, or is it something that maybe a large REIT or sophisticated customer would build, right? Like
yeah,
basically, we will set that standard. It's just really challenging, because then you get into the practical deployment of that, and you're asking, each of these applications to conform to the platform standard, and it's hard. It's hard. I really
well,
empathize with the
let's
challenge, I
think
guess.
about
Of,
the alternative. So what if I tried to implement all of the smart building solutions that should be implemented in the building without the platform, right? So what we've described at NREL, so NREL's kind of having these same conversations internally about our campus, is you have basically a dichotomy here. One's the platform scenario that we've been talking about, where everything's conforming to the data model there. The other alternative is that you have all these APIs, that you have like this mesh network that
mm,
I'm SkySpark and I'm going to talk to Maximo and we're going to talk directly. And then I'm going to talk to ArcGIS next and we're going to talk
mm,
directly. And that ArcGIS and Maximo are going to also talk. And now we have
mm-hmm,
all of these different connections. And every time I update, say, SkySpark's data model, how do I then push that or communicate that new model to ArcGIS and Maximo and whatever else, right? And now you have this that sounds, again, I'm not a platform architect, but that sounds like it's headed someplace messy. Um,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's just, I mean, NREL is it's a campus, multiple sites, but like
yeah,
the second you go beyond a campus to a portfolio, I mean,
yeah,
that just seems to fall apart. Like, again, we're not defining what a platform is, but I think it's the former definition of what you started there, where like it feels like those all need to conform to a common platform standard, down to how those APIs interact, right? And how those push up. It's just the challenge is, you just listed off 3 or 4 vendors there, and they're not sitting around, mapping their API for fun to customer A, customer B, customer C. It's like, here's our
nope,
API doc. Go do what you want with this. Like, we're not going to go rewrite our API. So there's this like mapping exercise that's missing, I think, to build the platform.
yeah,
And we think of that again a lot. And like, I think the analogy, I guess, is kind of like the haystack tagging to make DMS data uniform,
hmm,
but it's a much different exercise to make these other applications uniform to the platform. And
yeah,
again, there's no standard to follow. So you're basically defining the platform. And that's why I still think, this is an interesting rant, because I don't know that we have, it's not negative
no,
or
we don't.
positive, right? It's just like a rant about the complexity of this from a technical standpoint, but I think also the complexity of it from, I don't know, I want to say like almost like the business standpoint of it, because
Well,
this
we've
is
talked
getting
about it on two
into,
different levels here. We've talked about it on the integration level, and we've talked about it on the application level
mhm.
a little bit. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I think it's a neutral rant. It's not friendly, it's not negative. I think it's just an interesting, like a pondering rant. But I do agree, the negative side, the true core of the rant is in the misuse of the term, or setting the expectation, right? Maybe that, oh, you've got 6 CMMS platforms across your portfolio, no problem. Like, we're gonna just bring them all together. Like,
Mm,
there's a ton of nuance in that. Yeah, like, I guess to tie it back to some original points, like, it's easy to set expectations. There won't be any complications here. And if you are actually building a platform, there have to be complications. Like, it's unavoidable to, like,
this is a
if
complicated
you,
thing.
if the vision of what you want to do is that seamless, like, I can look at any site, create tickets, and just know that like that created a work order here, there, it doesn't matter. Like, I had this seamless experience. Yeah, there's a lot to that is going to be a standard you develop, frankly, with the project. It's going to be based on the parts you bring together and how that particular customer wants to experience it. And so you're kind of, I don't know, maybe I probably shouldn't be saying this out loud, but you're kind of like, you're customizing, you're like custom developing, right? A platform. I
Hmm.
don't think there is an off the shelf platform to just go buy. I think
Well, that's
that's
part
the
of
misuse of the
that
term.
was part of my message in several meetings this week, which was I don't have some product to point you towards.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, yeah, it's not out there at this point, but it feels like it's needed. So if there are any platform architects out there that want to enlighten us about this, let us know.
Yeah.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, please subscribe at nexus.substack.com. You can find show notes for this conversation there as well. As always, please reach out on LinkedIn with any thoughts on this episode. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.